So today, in my message, I want to share with you about waiting on God. And it almost seems like in some ways we are in a season of waiting on God, considering we've been in a global pandemic for nearly 2 years. And we can probably all think of a story that we have about waiting on God, right? We can probably come up with one, right? Waiting on God to get my test results back. Waiting on God to not have to wear a mask anymore. Waiting on God to, go back to church or whatever those things may be. Or for me, it was get out of quarantine, get the test, several of those things. But probably my biggest waiting on God story during the pandemic was with my mom. She got actually COVID in March of 2020. So right at the very beginning, when most people didn't even know how serious this was going to be. But she became very ill. She was in the hospital for 99 days, 29 days on a ventilator. The doctor told me on 3 different occasions, your mom will probably not make it. Well, God had some other things in store. And on the 100th day, she got to come home from the hospital, less her toes, because she had lost circulation and had to amputate her toes. But a few months after that, in Thanksgiving of 2020, she and my dad had our entire family over for Thanksgiving, and she cooked the entire meal. But we were waiting on God, and God answered that prayer and healed her, and we're so grateful. And every day we consider it a blessing and so grateful that God gave us more time with my mom. And next week I'm leaving to go there to West Monroe, Louisiana to have another Thanksgiving dinner with my mom and my dad. So we are now in another type season, right, of waiting on God as we move into a transition of finding a new pastor. And I can assure you, been involved in this many times, it is definitely a time to be patient and make sure that we wait on God. But let me tell you why I'm optimistic and confident as we move in this time of transition. Number one, I've worked with a lot of pastors through the years that when they've left the church, they didn't leave it set up for success. They kind of left it in a mess. And Pastor Todd, and I'm going to put this for the record, he did the best job of any pastor I've ever worked with to set Tabernacle up for great success. And I mean that. His heart was to be here to make sure things went well, and he did a phenomenal job. So that's one of the reasons why I'm confident that things will go well in the transition. The second thing, the more I get to know the people at Tabernacle, I realize why it's such a great church. You know why it's such a great church? Because there's some great people here. And I mean that. Some great leaders, some really committed people to the Lord, to the Word of God. They're faithful. They're servants. I mean, I was talking to this young couple sitting right over here, and they've been serving in preschool ministry for 38 years. Is that right? 38 years? 36 years. Okay. But once you get past 30, it doesn't really matter, right? 36, 38, I mean, come on. They don't miss a Sunday. Every week they're here serving. What a great example of servanthood. And again, Cody shared about the generosity of this people. So I'm confident in what God's going to do because this is a great church. And the other reason I'm confident, and you already know this, there's an amazing staff team already in place to help lead during this transition. So I'm confident for those reasons. But let me share with you the main reason I'm confident, and that's really what I want to share with you today of why I'm confident of what's going to be happening in the days ahead. So I want to retell a story. It's a story from the Old Testament, and I learned a very important yet simple truth of how God works, and this truth that I learned impacted my life in such a way it changed how I looked at things. And I really believe today is an opportunity for us to look at this truth, and it could impact us as individuals and as a church as we move through this transition time. Now, this is an Old Testament story about Joseph. Now, you may be familiar with Joseph. So there was Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Joseph was one of Jacob's 12 sons, and he was Jacob's favorite son. Now, let's face it, his brothers just didn't care for him too much. One of the reasons why he was Jacob's favorite. Number two, there was times where Joseph could come across a little arrogant, right? And so one day, the brothers saw Joseph coming, and they said, "Here comes that dreamer, let's kill him. But instead of killing him, they decided to throw him into a dry cistern and sell him to the Ishmaelites that were on their way to Egypt. Now, I want us to just pause here for just a second. And I want you to think about the situation at hand. Here's this 17-year-old boy. All of a sudden, he finds himself shackled ankle to ankle with other slaves on the way to a foreign land with a foreign language to be sold into slavery to who knows who for who knows what. At this point in Joseph's life, he is pretty much depending on God. He's having to wait on God to deliver him. But see, from the vantage point of history and Scripture, we know that God was up to something huge in Joseph's life, and Joseph had no idea. Could that be true of your life? Could that be true of this season of waiting on God for Tabernacle Church? That even though we may not see it, that God is up to something huge? See, from the lens of eternity, taking the big picture, what was God doing? God was taking this 17-year-old boy and he was strategically positioning him to raise up a nation from within the nation where the Messiah would ultimately come and save the entire world. And the whole thing rested on this 17-year-old boy that had no clue what God was up to. Now, I want us to pick up that story of Joseph and starting in Genesis 39, chapter 39, verses 1 and 2. So if you're with me there, look what it says. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites. Remember, the Ishmaelites is the one that got him from the brothers. They bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. Now get this, you don't want to miss it. The Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. Now, how can that be that the Lord was with Joseph? He's now a slave in an Egyptian home. Now listen, we all know this, right? Nothing ever happens bad when the Lord's with you, right? Maybe we need to look at this a little differently. See, the story goes on, and things seem to improve for Joseph. He's bought by Potiphar. Look what it says in Genesis 39, verse 5. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, in both his house and in the field. Is that not just a little bit unbelievable? The Lord doesn't bless Joseph, but he blesses Potiphar's household. Now listen, if I'm Joseph, I'm like, God, what about me? Why don't you bless me? Why are you blessing Potiphar? Could you be playing a significant role in what God is up to in the circumstances that you're in today? Could that be the case? That God is getting ready to do something incredible, huge, in whatever circumstances you're in. See, Joseph was a slave in Potiphar's home. What about Tabernacle Church? Here we are in this season of waiting on God in a time of transition. Could Tabernacle be playing a significant role in reaching this county for Christ? Is that possible? Absolutely. One of the things working with a lot of churches through the years, I've seen God do some incredible things even in a season of waiting on God to bring the next pastor. Here's the truth. Do you know what Joseph was doing while he was waiting on God in his circumstances as a prisoner in Potiphar's house, as a slave? So here's the truth that I want you to get. This is what Joseph did in Potiphar's household. He did exactly what a 17-year-old boy would do, who had been stripped away from his family, thrown into a cistern, sold into slavery, who was absolutely confident that God was with him. That's all he did. No matter your circumstances, no matter where Joseph was, he was confident that God was with him. Now the story continues, and things went from good to bad to worse. God gives him the first test. In verse 7, it tells us that Potiphar's wife, he's in this home, the master's wife, tried to seduce Joseph. Here, Joseph is in a no-win situation. So think about it. If he has relations with Potiphar's wife and the master finds out, he'll be hung. If he offends the mistress, then he'll be hung. He's put into a no-win, impossible situation. But the scripture says that day after day after day, Joseph said no. Then finally, he has a very interesting conversation to explain why he cannot be with her. So look in the story of chapter 39 of Genesis, verse 9. Look what he says. Chapter 39, verse 9. It says, "My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" Do you mean the God that so richly blessed you, Joseph? Why can't you sin against him? See, Joseph did exactly what any young man would do that was ripped away from his family, thrown into a cistern, sold as a slave, and put into an impossible no-win situation. That's what he did. See, somehow Joseph knew, although God may have been silent while he was waiting on him, God was not absent. Now, do you remember how he was rewarded? He's framed for rape, and when Potiphar comes home, he's thrown into Pharaoh's dungeon, and there he is, Joseph, once again, waiting on God. He's just this boy. He's thrown into a dungeon with other prisoners. He barely even knows the language, and he finds himself waiting on God. Now look at Genesis 39, verse 21. Look what it says here. Again, he's in the dungeon. It says that the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. See, no matter what Joseph faced, the Lord was with him. And although God may have been silent, God was not absent from Joseph's life. Did you notice the last part of that verse? I always find this just a little bit humorous to me. It says that he had favor in the eyes of the prison warden. He had favor in the eyes of the prison warden. And let me just say as a general rule, if you're on a first name basis and you know the prison warden pretty well, things are probably not going real well for you. You know what I'm saying? You're probably in a little bit of trouble. You're pretty much down to nothing in that situation. Do you know why Joseph found favor with the prison warden and Potiphar? Do you know why he found favor? No matter how bad the circumstances were, if you look at this, no matter how bad, thrown into a dungeon, accused falsely of rape, no matter what he was going through, ripped away from his family, his brothers betrayed him, it did not matter what he went through. Joseph simply did what anyone would do who was absolutely confident that God was with him. That's what Joseph did, and that's why the Lord was with him. Now, in chapter 40, Joseph has a glimmer of hope. Pharaoh got mad at the cupbearer and the baker, and he threw them into the dungeon where Joseph was. So one morning, they're having breakfast, and the cupbearer and the baker mentioned that they had this dream, and Joseph said, "Hey, I can interpret the dream." So they share the dream. Joseph interprets, and he says to the cupbearer that he would be released from prison in 3 days. Shared the dream. He interpreted the dream. You're going to be released in 3 days. Look what it says in chapter 40, verse 14. Look what Joseph says. He says, but when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of prison. Joseph wanted out of there. Just mention to me. Joseph just simply asked, mention me to Pharaoh. Now look what happens. Chapter 40, verse 23, it says this, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Again, Joseph thought he had a chance. This is my opportunity. But he's having to wait on God. See, I love this story because it really is a microcosm of how God is working all the time. It's God saying, just because you do not see it does not mean I am not up to something big. I'm working. Just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it doesn't make sense. Just because you don't know how to interpret your circumstances. Listen, God said, my ways are higher than your ways. It's not for us to understand. It's our job to trust that he is with us. Our responsibility is to wake up every single day and ask the question, what would someone do in my circumstance, in my situation today, if they were absolutely confident God was with them? And then tomorrow, I'll get up, and whatever my situation is, I'll live that day with the understanding that I'm going to live knowing that God is with me and God is for me, and I'm going to live my life that way. Whatever is going on, whatever the circumstances may be, what would that person do if they were confident that God is with them? Let me ask you, what would you do if you were absolutely confident that God is with you? How would you live your life? Now, the Bible tells us that 2 years went by. 2 years. And although the cupbearer had forgotten him, God had not forgotten. Let me ask you, do you ever feel forgotten? Do you ever wonder, do people even know what's going on in your life and the difficulties and the challenges? Do you ever feel forgotten? God has not forgotten you. Just remember that. In chapter 41, it says that Pharaoh now, he had a dream. So Pharaoh calls in all of his wise counselors, everybody together, and he gets some advice from them about interpreting this dream, but no one could do it. So finally in verse 12, it says, guess what? Oh, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. Like, it would have been nice if that had happened a couple years earlier. Look what it says in verse 14. So Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and he was quickly brought from the dungeon. When he had shaved and changed his clothes, he came before the Pharaoh. Now think about it. Think about this situation. He's been waiting on God. This is his big moment, a moment of truth. It's the big raise. It's the big promotion. It's the thing that happens that puts him into financial freedom for the rest of your life kind of deal. It's that moment that Joseph's in. He's brought before the most powerful man in the world, a man that thinks of himself as God. And look what happens. Chapter 41, 15 and 16, look what it says. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I've heard it said that you hear a dream and you can interpret it. There it is. Joseph's opportunity. Then what does Joseph say? Look at his words. I cannot do it. Joseph replied to the Pharaoh, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires. See, Joseph, in that moment, he recognized that all blessing and power, the source of that is not him, but it comes from God, no one else. Can I say something to us at Tabernacle Church? We need to remember that as well. All blessing and power comes from God. And we need to lean into that. God will provide. God will be there for us when we feel like we've been forsaken. We can count on God. The Lord will be with us. We can have confidence in that. Now, why did Joseph say that? He said those words because that's what you do when you're absolutely confident that God is with you. That never changes. No matter your circumstances, it doesn't matter if you're in the prison or you're brought in the palace in front of the most powerful man in the world. Your circumstances do not dictate your faith to believe and have confidence that God is with you. So Pharaoh was not offended. He said, hey, here's the dream. And then Joseph responded as, here's the interpretation. By now, Joseph is 30 years old, and he's standing in front of the most powerful man in the world after spending years and years in the dungeon. He interprets the dream, and then he goes on and tells Pharaoh how to handle the prophetic dream. Joseph all of a sudden starts outlining the whole plan like someone had asked him. All he was asked was, would you interpret the dream? Not economics 101, not how to run the country, but just to interpret the dream. But see, that's the confidence you find in those who are absolutely confident that God is with them. That's how they act. In chapter 41, verse 41, look what it says. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Now imagine that. Here's this young guy. He's been in this dungeon. He can barely speak the language. He's a foreigner. He interprets the dreams. He outlines, and Pharaoh says, that guy's got God's presence on him. He has wisdom. I'm going to take him. We're going to bypass all the other leaders. We're going to put him in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Do you know what Joseph did next in that moment? He's now got everything he wants. He's the second most powerful person in the world. You know what he did? He did exactly what you would do if you had been ripped away from your family, thrown into a cistern, sold into slavery, framed for rape, thrown into a dungeon, interpreted a dream and gave great advice, and then put over the entire country of Egypt. He did exactly what anybody in his circumstances would do that was absolutely confident that God was with him. That's what he did. Do you think Joseph knew in this situation of circumstances that God was up to something, that the same God that had been silent but not absent would accomplish his will to create a nation from within a nation, that ultimately the Messiah would come and the whole world would be saved? And the main player really didn't have any idea what God was up to. All Joseph knew in that moment is this: get this truth, that God is with me. Can I tell you something? God is going to be with Tabernacle Church in this time that we're waiting on God. I am absolutely confident in that. Now, there was a king named David, and he lived between the time of Joseph and Jesus. And he said it this way in Psalm 23:4. He said this: even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. And then Jesus said in Matthew 28:18-20, he said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And get this, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. See, the challenge for you and the challenge for me is for us to live our lives with the confidence that no matter what we're going through, that God is with us. That's the challenge. It doesn't matter if you're going through major health challenges. If you're in a financial strait, maybe you've got someone in your family you're at odds with, maybe you got a rebellious child. No matter your circumstances, that we live with the confidence that no matter what we're going through, that God is with us. For the last 14 years, my wife and I have been waiting on God to heal her from a rare autoimmune disease. This disease has attacked her thyroid, her heart, her inner ear, her eyes, her esophagus, her joints, and other parts of her body. In the last 14 years, she's had over 75 surgical procedures. We had one Wednesday. We've got more scheduled. I stepped down from being the executive pastor at a church so that I could be there to take care of her, to have the flexibility with schedule to be there. It's an ongoing thing. It's like a full-time caregiver in that regard. But we did that. She and I made that decision and commitment knowing that things were going to change. But we were hoping that God would still allow us to continue to serving Him through church consulting and other ministries. Since that time, we've been very blessed that we've started 2 nonprofits, and I have my own church consulting firm over the last 14 years, that we've been able to serve and help over 15,000 churches in over 50 countries. We've also had the honor to help great churches like Tabernacle Church and get to experience God do some amazing things. We could have never imagined, while we were waiting on God to heal my wife Cindy, that He had something even bigger in mind. And I'll be honest with you, there were moments of doubt with me. Like, how's this going to work? Is she ever going to get better? Moments of doubt. But I can tell you, my wife never once had a doubt that even though God may be silent in this one area, that she was always confident that God was going to be with us every step of the way. And He has. We are in a season at Tabernacle Church that we are waiting on God to bring the next pastor. But that does not mean that God is not going to do something amazing in this season of waiting on God. And so, for me, I want to live and lead each day with the confidence, no matter what the circumstances are, no matter what is going on, that God is going to be with us. And I want to challenge everybody in this room and everybody watching by television or watching it online, that you will live your life with the confidence, no matter your circumstances, that God is with you. Can you do that? Can you do that? Can you do that? That's all Joseph did. That was an important lesson I learned many years ago. No matter my circumstances, my wife is having a good day or a bad day, that God is with us. And not only is He with us, but He is for us. And He's for you, and He's for Tabernacle Church, and He's going to bless us. So let's live every day with the confidence that God is with us.